Okay, I think I'll get started now. This is my presentation, Rule Your Platform, Leveraging Drupal's Conditions API for Modular Site Control. This is actually quite interesting based on if you went to the presentation earlier about the University of Louisville. There's some interesting things they did and some things we didn't do on the state of Iowa platforms. But yeah, let's get started. I didn't put my picture there because you get to see it here, but I'm a senior developer at Lullabot. I've been developing for 20 years, 12 of which have been Drupal. I've been at Lullabot for 4 years. I'm a massive Colorado Avalanche fan. I know I have a different accent. That's partly why I'm actually in Colorado, is because I'm such a big hockey fan. I also make electronic music, if you want to talk to me about that, and I love Conditions as of a few months ago. So I'll just explain a bit why, but just quickly about Lullabot, we're 100% employee owned. We all own the company. There's no other stakeholders. Every employee there has their own stake in the company. And we do strategy design and Drupal development for large scale systems. So in this session, I want to talk about what conditions are, where you may be using them, where they can be used, and give some of the examples from the State of Iowa marketing platform that we've been building for the last 18 or so months, and show how we accomplished some of what we did. So first off, who here knows what the Conditions API is in Drupal? Half at the back, nice. That surprises me, but it also doesn't, because I also didn't know anything about it really until recently. But essentially, it's a super underutilized API, in my opinion. And what it's designed to do is to allow you to create plugins to centralize logic around Boolean checks, true or false checks. And you've probably used it, you just didn't know you were using it. Like when you're placing blocks in the block layout, and you get what content type does this block appear on? What language pages does? That's the Conditions API. And as I mentioned, it's basically a series of different plugins. They're really simple. They evaluate some logic. They return a true or false, but you can also configure them with forms and settings like checkboxes for particular content types, for particular languages. And I'll show some of the other ones that come with core. And you can also utilize built-in contexts. So things like the root path and the current logged in user and things and that sort of stuff. So this is probably not very easy to see, but that's fine. That's all good, because really there's only two important things here, or two interesting things, I think. There's build configuration form, which is a standard form API render array where you build your form. And then down at the bottom, it's like 7 lines long for me, evaluate. So all it does is it takes some settings and it evaluates, compares those values to whatever business logic you need, and it will spit out a true or false. At the very top, you may be able to see, or you may not be able to see, but there's a PHP attribute that basically says this is a condition class. So this class is a condition, and to build a plugin based on that. So where do we use these things? At the moment, Drupal core comes with, and there may be newer ones since I started this, but entity bundles, languages, as I said, what theme you're currently viewing the site in, what the current request path is, also response status, so you can put different blocks on if it's a 403 or a 404 page, and user role as well. So you can just show, you can evaluate conditions based on if someone is an administrator or just a lowly anonymous user. And currently these are, like, block layout is the big one where I think most people will have touched them. And this is an example on the right-hand side of what you might have seen in block layout. So you have a visibility and then a bunch of conditions, and then if you click on them, you basically expands out their settings. There are a couple here you might not recognize. Config page field value is one that comes from the config pages module. Parent menu is something we built custom, which allowed us to show a block based on if a page was nested under another page. So you could do things like show a sub navigation or a section navigation based on if a page was nested under a parent or not. And then some of the other ones, language we've spoken about, static settings, I'll be getting to that later. But yeah, these things are already there, and you've probably already used them, and you just didn't really know they were conditions. Path Auto kind of uses conditions. I was trying to modify some Path Auto to add in additional conditions, and it does evaluate conditions, but it doesn't use the conditions build. Like, it doesn't build a form based on conditions. They've actually just duplicated the forms that would be there. So it kind of uses conditions, but not fully. So when might you want to use conditions? I'm going to use the State of Iowa marketing platform as an example, and I'll give a bit of background on this. At Lullabot, we've built two platforms for the State of Iowa. We've built one which we call the DX platform, which is the digital experience platform, which is for all of their state departments, things like the Department of Education and whatnot. There's 40, 50 sites all using that platform. But then they also came to us and they said, hey, we've got these other sites that are more marketing sites, and they're more like, they don't follow the same branding, and they kind of like, they've had their own sites for so many years and they've done their own things for so many years, and they don't want to be on the DX platform. They don't want to lose their flexibility in their brand and all that stuff. So we came up with this second platform, which supports multiple sites as well, shared code base. They're all structurally consistent, same content types, asterisk. And they share config across all the sites without config splits. That was huge to us because if you've ever used config split, it can be a little bit brittle, and it can be kind of hard to separate dependent configs. So we were like, we don't want to end up with config splits if at all possible, but we do want these sites to be able to be a bit flexible in what they do, how they appear, and things like that. So to reiterate, we have all of the sites and they have exactly the same config, except there's a couple we ignore, things like site name and stuff like that. But for the most part, completely shared. But as I mentioned, some of them are a bit different. For example, a couple of sites needed their own taxonomy vocabularies that other sites didn't. One example is we have a site that has products, and they needed a product type taxonomy. No other site on this platform needed a product type, or even products. So that was a little bit different. A couple of the sites needed different fields or nodes that weren't needed elsewhere. And an example for that is on the Stop Human Trafficking site that we built. They have locations that every 3 years need to be recertified that they've done all the training for human trafficking awareness and that sort of stuff. No other location on the other sites required that sort of field. So it just didn't make sense for it to be there for everyone, because it would just be confusing. Like, why when I'm creating this location, is there this field that makes no sense to me? We use Layout Builder, and we use Layout Builder styles sparingly, but there was one site that wanted to have their own Layout Builder styles that none of the other sites needed. We also had a couple that had unique views. For example, the Stop Human Trafficking site, constituents can log into the site and manage their own locations. So if I'm a hotel owner, I can log into the site and I can update the telephone number or whatever of my location. And there were certain views associated with that process that, again, didn't apply to all of the sites. And then view filters and and fields as well. And I'll show some of this in a little bit. So how did we do that? First module, entity type access conditions. This allows you to control access for entity types, as you might think. This is different from entity access. This is the access to the actual type. And it can be used to control visibility of particular entity types. For example, as I mentioned, the product media type and the product type taxonomy were unique to one of the sites on the IOR platform. So this module enabled us to do that, but keep the config exported and consistent across all the sites on the platform. Module number 2, field visibility conditions. And this one allows you to control whether a field on a particular entity type or entity bundle is visible in a form. So one of the, as I mentioned, the Iowa example is the certification date for locations does not make any sense on any of the other sites. So it is only visible on that one site. And this is an example of the config export section that applies to a field visibility condition. It's a third-party setting, so it's got a config schema, it's validatable and all that good stuff. But this chunk would be exported with your field config. And so you can see, and the examples I'm showing are not the Iowa examples, they're examples I've built for this presentation. But you can see down at the bottom, we've got static settings, which I'll talk about in a minute, domain, and DCCO. I've built an example where I've got a site that has accessible via 2 different domains, so I can show that you're seeing 2 different things, even though they're the exact same site with the exact same config. So these things get exported as third-party settings. Layout builder styles conditions allows us to, as I mentioned, control availability of particular styles on different sites. In our example, we had gradients that could be added to layout builder blocks for one of the sites on the platform. And then views access conditions. Yeah, we built a lot of modules and we contributed them all back, so they can be used by other people. But views access conditions is exactly what it sounds like. You can restrict access to views based on these conditions. So the example from the Iowa platform was we had location manager and owner views. So as a user, I can log in and I can manage my own location, and those views are not available anywhere else to any of the other sites because they don't have that sort of functionality or requirements. And this is an example of how that would be exported. And in this case, I've got a second one up here, DCCO day of week. That's an example I'm going to show in a minute, but it's just a very basic condition. But we have static setting, context, static settings, brilliantly named. And the setting, so this will appear only on DCCO and not on COCD. Now, all of these modules were made possible using this other module we contributed, which is the conditions helper module. And we were finding as we were building out these modules that we were doing the same stuff over and over again. We were extending the same base classes, and we were kind of like just copying and pasting code for how to evaluate conditions and how to do all these things. And it made sense that there wasn't a way of doing this in core. I did come across an issue in the Drupal core issue queue that was like, there should be some sort of helper to do this. I came across that after I built this, but I clearly agree. There should be some sort of easy way to build conditions and to evaluate them and that sort of stuff. So this module, the conditions helper, was used by all of the other 4 or 5 that I just went through. And it just has some helpful functions, some base classes you can extend from, and it just reduces the amount of boilerplate code you need when you're building out your own conditions if you choose to do so. So static settings and static setting context. I have to apologize to myself and my team every day for naming static setting context instead of static settings conditions, but like we all make mistakes, and I can't really go back because of the namespaces and everything. Anyway, that should have been called static settings conditions, sorry. What static settings is a way of defining settings in a structured way, in a reliable way. And it's an API to allow you to basically set settings and get settings. Really basic, but a lot of people probably here have gone into their settings.php and they've added particular configuration or whatever in their settings, or they've checked against in-environment variables and things like that. What the static settings API allows us to do is just makes that consistent. It gives us a way of setting values in such a way that they're type safe, so you can't set something to be an integer when it should be a string. And you can introspect them, which means you can evaluate what the values of those settings could be, and you can build forms from them, which is important for the other module. It also works with code completion and validation in your IDE. So if you try to set a static setting with a value that is not valid, you'll get a red squiggly underline in your IDE, and you already automatically know you've done something wrong. But these, under the hood, they leverage PHP 8.1 enums, or enumerations, which is basically a way of saying they're fixed values, or there's a set of values that you can pick from, and you can only use those values. So where your brain might be going now is that if you can have a set of values that you know what they're going to be, and you can discover them by looking at the enum, can't we just automatically build conditions from these? And that's what this other module does. It finds all of these enums, and it builds a condition automatically for it, including the form and the evaluation of that condition. So all you have to do to convert an enum into a condition is you add a little bit of PHP, a little PHP attribute to the top of the enum, and then you put it inside your source plugin static settings. And here's an example. So very simple. This is, if we skip the top part, that's the PHP attribute that's basically saying this is a static setting plugin. If we look at the bottom, we have enum domain string. That's saying there's this enum, which is called domain, returns a string. It implements the base static settings interface. Enums are weird. You can't, well, they're not weird, I guess, but it's kind of by design. You can't extend a class, but you can implement an interface. So using that interface allows us to make sure that the class the enum is valid. But what we're saying down here is there are two different values this domain could represent. DCCO, which is drupalcamp.colorado.ddev.site, and COCD, which is Colorado drupalcamp.ddev.site, which will be important when we get to the demo I've got prepared in a little bit. And this is what that static settings looks like as a condition, automatically generated. That is all the code we had. And we get the form, we get a condition ready to be used wherever you choose to use them. And each of those modules I mentioned earlier, so the views access conditions, the entity type access conditions, they all have their own configuration forms. So you can say, which conditions do I want to be able to control views access or entity type access? So you can pick and choose it. Like if you don't want to use static settings, or you don't want to use the request path or the language, you can just turn them off, and then they don't appear in the form. So that's what we get from that. And this is what we do under the hood. So in my settings.php, I've checked what the host name was. And if it was Colorado drupalcamp.ddev.site, then I'm using the static settings API to set the value. And if it's drupalcamp.colorado.ddev.site, I'm setting the different value. So you can see domain, : COCD, and domain, : DCCO. Once you've done that, you can also reuse that, like you can go into your module and you can check, you can do static settings get, and you can retrieve the values of those things. But in this case, I don't need to do that because the static settings context module automatically will pull these things for us. So I realize I'm racing through this, but that's okay. Here we have a side-by-side. And if we look up, if you look at up at the top, we have drupalcamp-colorado.ddev.site here. And over here, we have colorado-drupalcamp.ddev.site. They're the same site. They're the same database. They're the same everything. They just I just set up an alias in DDEV. But what we'll notice is if I start clicking around, I've prepared some of these links to demo some of this stuff, but I've clicked, I've gone to the node add form up here. You can see node add. And if I go over onto this site, you notice only on DCCO is not available. And that is because if I now switch back, if this is the editing the content type of only on DCCO. If I scroll down to the bottom, you'll see I'm going to collapse day of week because we're not using that right now. You see static settings. And then I've only enabled it on the DrupalCamp colorado.ddev.site. But it's the same site, it's the same config. It's because it's a third-party setting, you can export it without concern of it not working on this site or that. It's the same, exactly the same config. So if I go back now we're going to do the same thing with a restricted content field. Collapse that. So I'm going to create an article here. And you notice DCCO only field is available on the DrupalCamp Colorado site, but not on the other one. And it's a very similar, pretty much an identical way of doing this. I go to manage the fields, I edit the field, and there's my static setting. So now this view here is available on this site, but not this site. And again, this is why I built the conditions helper. Like this stuff is all the same. And I can totally imagine this being used in a bunch of different places. But for a view, in Access, you can select conditions, and then you can control the conditions that appear, and you can set those settings. And then those things get evaluated on the config's the same, but they get evaluated on the per request, and those requests can obviously be cached as well. So it's not running these every single time. And then this one's a bit more interesting because same view, same content, but this image field is restricted. So in the example of the Iowa site, we could show a certification date field here and not on the other sites, and they would be none the wiser. And the other thing up here, you can see it also works with filters, exposed filters, sorry. So this tags is available on one site, but it's not available on this site. And it also works with contextual filters, which is a bit weird to think about. But what it does is, if a contextual filter is set to not be available on a particular site, if someone passes that in Europe, it's just like you passing in some random query string. It's just that won't do anything. That one's kind of harder to demonstrate though in this sort of context, because a contextual filter is a bit weird, visually at least. So I'll show how these work as well. So this is the view. If I go into the field for image, hey, look, my conditions are there as well. And same with the filter tags. There's my condition. Now, Also, like, so I've shown we can control it based on URL, if that's what you want to do, on domain. But you can also, if I go into this restricted access one, you can write your own conditions. So this day of the week one I showed earlier, or at least I showed the form and the evaluation of the condition. That's not using static settings. That's just a normal condition. It doesn't use the static settings API at all. So you can write whatever logic you want. I toyed with the idea of like coming up with a condition for this presentation that would check the lunar cycle. I just couldn't be bothered with it. So I ended up with day of the week. So I was not getting into that. So right now it works on any day of the week. But it's Friday today, but I'm going to set this to Saturday. I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to go back. Now I cannot get to it because that additional condition doesn't apply. So the way these things work is the conditions themselves within a condition, you can configure this, but within a condition, they're typically like ORs. So is it this user role or this role or this role, or is it this day or this day? But like between conditions, it uses and. So all of the condition has to return true, but when it returns true could be based on like 2 or 3 different conditions, 2 or 3 different values. It can combine these things in any number of ways. It's just, for us on the marketing platform, it's been super helpful because our config is clean, and we roll out our sites, the config to every single site. We're locally we use Tugboat for previewing our PRs. Locally and on Tugboat, we actually use multisite, but when we push to Pantheon, each site actually has its own copy of the code. They're all separate sites. But it means we can push code out to all of them, and we run a config sync on every single deploy. But we can still have this flexibility for each of these sites individually. Now, I blasted through that way quicker than I thought I would. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
So we're in the process of adding with com feature flags or design toggles, whatever you want. If you were doing that, would you do that with this, or would you just have a Boolean that you look up from your settings? And
well, the reason we don't just do it in the settings is because it's not very structured, like in the sense that you could set that to anything. It should be a Boolean value, but there's nothing stopping you putting a string value or an integer or whatever. So using the static settings is because it's type safe. It means you can't mess it up. Like if you try and mess it up, your site won't run, and you'll know long before it gets to production that it's not going to work. Whereas if you just set something, a string or whatever in the settings, then who knows? There could be something tries to evaluate it, and it's just not going to work. So that's why the static settings originally came about, because each of our sites has a slightly different look and feel. So we use static settings to say, on this site, include this set of design tokens. But we also say this site wants to use curved borders on their blocks, and this site wants to use these other things. So we have a set of 6 or so static settings that we set in our settings, but then we can use all of those things wherever we need to as conditions if we need to. So we can show different things based on whatever design package is being used, essentially. But we looked at other things like feature flags, but they're kind of Boolean in nature. They're on or off. In our case, we have 5, 6, any number of different design packages. Boolean is not sufficient for us. We looked at other things that other Lullabots had built. This thing they called a switchboard, but it was also kind of Boolean. This is it's really small. It's a very small PHP library, but because we can leverage it, because they're enums, we can leverage it and automatically transform them into conditions. And it was super helpful for us. Yeah.
When you define days of the week as an enum, did that automatically become available in block visibility settings as well?
So the day of the week one isn't an enum, it's just a regular condition. But in theory, if I'd created that as a static setting enum, and I'd provided it with the PHP 8 attribute, it would have automatically created a condition with checkboxes for each day of the week.
Inside the Drupal core block?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Could you, or would you, I guess, do something like more dynamic, based on another field value or something, or sort of field value? Have you ever asked for that from a client, or?
We've not, but given that conditions are basically a block of logic, you could evaluate whatever. Right. You could do, yeah, you could have the form could be, you select the field you want to evaluate, you select the operator, and you select something like that. You could build that sort of thing as a condition and then shove it in to block visibility or, yeah. This is why I think conditions are like super underutilized, is that they're really simple at their heart, but you could do cool stuff with them.
I mean, ECA is sort of in this realm.
We considered ECA as well, but it was overkill for us, to be honest. Any other questions? I spoke very fast, I'm sorry.
You should be.
Okay, I'll try again. Let's start again. Cool. Yeah, all of those modules are available on Drupal.org. If you want to talk about them, ask questions about them, feel free. You can find me Owen Bush, no spaces, on Slack or Drupal.org. But, cool.
Those examples that you had to are available somewhere? You might mention that.
No, but I could probably, I'll probably publish this somewhere or make this available somewhere.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, post this to Slack.
Yeah, if you share it.
Yeah, of course, yeah, no worries. Cool, thank you.
Thank you.